It's very difficult. But whether it's Twitter, the internet, the print media, the television media, whatever it might be, I just don't see an option in the longer term other than seeking to be authentic, because I think people understand it when you're authentic. I think they understand that you're being genuine, even if you're getting it wrong. And I think I'm happy to be scrutinised by the public as I am by the media in the former role. But I think the Australian public understand that media treatment of political leaders also, on occasion, leaves a little bit to be desired. No, I'm not. No, I'm not having. Please understand, I'm not having a dig at Annabel and Christopher. It's a generic comment around the quality of public policy debate we have in Australia.
Have a dig by all means.
Yeah, exactly. You may be surprised to hear that I agree with you in some of what you said. I do think that there is something odd about this field in Australia. I think that, words are the stock in trade of the politician. I mean, words are all, in the end, that a politician has to bring an audience along with him or her. And the thing that amazes me in this country is that so many of them are so incredibly bad at it. I mean, we endure incompetence in this field completely unblinkingly. Now, if you're a mechanic turned up to service your car armed with a banana, you'd be kind of quite reasonably suspicious about it. But we not only tolerate but expect our politicians to speak in gibberish. We expect ministers to line up at the dispatch box in question time and dully read out this turgid prose. We expect to get halfway through a Kevin Rudd speech and find our thoughts turning to self-harm and whether the iron's been left on. I mean, I've thought about some very unusual things during question time. And we don't kind of expect any different. And the other unusual thing about Australia, I think, often is the incredible suspicion that attaches itself to politicians who try to get any better at it. The suspicion that attaches to politicians that employ speechwriters is quite unusual. There's something kind of shameful in Australia about employing a speechwriter. There's something secretive about it. And it's often a bit of a bloke problem, I think. I never really notice it so much in female politicians, but Australian male politicians are usually about as comfortable admitting that they use a speechwriter as they might be admitting that they use hand cream or something, And I think it's probably not an accident that our last Prime Minister, I think, who was probably a recognised orator of any kind, was Keating, whose use of speechwriters was viewed, I think, in the game with sort of the same sort of suspicion as his affection for French clocks. Anyway, I mean, the speechwriters is a tough gig in politics at the moment. Kevin Rudd does have one, incidentally. I've met him. He seems like a completely well-balanced man, which is, not the Prozac-infused wreck you would kind of expect. But the thing about politicians is that they kind of, in terms of language, they fall roughly into different groupings, and they're kind of readily identifiable. My favourite by a long shot, and they do tend to be public darlings, is the ones that I call the bunglers. And these are the people for whom the English language is just this minefield. It's a sort of vast expanse of unexploded ordnance through which they tiptoe, fearing the worst. Barnaby, well, and of course the international gold standard is George Bush the Younger, who, and as we sit here, we're only about 500 metres away from the place where in 2007 at the APEC conference he made a small and gracious speech thanking Austria for its hospitality. And I'm not going to run you through Bushisms because there's billions of them and they're all in books called things like, why the French don't have a word for entrepreneur and that sort of thing. But I did want to share some offerings from the UK's undisputed champion of bungle, John Prescott. Now, he is fabulous. Obviously, departed the scene now, but he is the man who, on landing at Heathrow after having a bad flight, said at a press conference, "It's great to be back on terracotta." Or sometimes the bungler's language is so opulently bizarre that it actually starts to make some sort of sense. And this one is a particularly good one for that. Prescott, making an observation on John Major's government just before they won power, said, here we have a government disintegrating between our eyes," which is terrific. So anyway, and we've got Australian practitioners of this art, of course, Joe Bjelke-Petersen being the best known example, although there is a very competitive young contender from the Victorian Senate, from the Senate from Victoria. Steve Fielding is rocketing up the ranks, I think, on that count. Then you have the orators who I'd call the meat and three veg people, like John Howard, who was never particularly flashy, never particularly ornate, and had only occasional fixations with words like the word mateship, which he sort of carried around, you know, in his pocket like a treasured possession that popped up every now and again. But otherwise, you know, meat and three veg. And then, of course, you have the Sorers, the Obamas and the Keatings and so on. But the very worst kind of political orator, I think, is the one that I call the extruder. Now, the extruder is a politician who has, in his or her head, a collection of grey, meaningless pieces of jargon that, when the time comes to fill a silence in the course of an interview or a speech or even a social conversation, will simply squirt out a selection of these words sufficient to fill the silence. And the thing about the extruder is that it's kind of like the oratorical equivalent of luncheon meat or something. It's mainly bulking agent. The other fascinating thing about it is that the phrases can often be rearranged without making any difference at all to the meaning of the sentence. And I've got an example from Kevin Rudd, which is terrific. I went to the Labor conference last year. It was the most unremittingly tedious event I've ever attended. Were you there or were you hiding?
No.
You were. Marvellous, wasn't it? And he said, he was, in the course of this speech, he was praising all of the asylum seeker activists within the ALP that he was shortly to disappoint so profoundly. And praising the battles that have been fought at Labor conferences past over this issue, although he was gently allowing it to be intuited that no such behaviour would be tolerated these days. He said, where is it? He said, "Those resolutions represented the consistency of our purpose, the conviction of our resolve," which sounded, you know, perfectly passionate until you realised you could actually rearrange all of those clauses and say, "Those convictions represented the purpose of our resolve, the resolution of our consistency." Language is only this malleable when it means absolutely nothing. And the way to spot the extruder, by the way, is there's all sorts of buzzwords. Rollouts, particularly the rollouts of things that are not round. That's a very popular one. The task forces and so on, and particularly the partnering. There's a lot of partnering in an extruder speech. There's more partnerings than a night out at Ken's of Kensington, to add a contemporary reference. Anyway, I'm just blathering on now, aren't I? I do think that one of the... okay. nothing is actually attempted by this language. It's risk-free language for a politician because it doesn't offer anything. It serves to obscure or to mark time rather than to reveal. Yeah, it doesn't commit the speaker to anything at all. And if you look at someone like Kevin Rudd, you know, what's got him into trouble in the last little bit is the clarity of his language early on.